Our next presenter is one of my favorite people, Dr. Helen Rountree. She's a world-renowned author and anthropologist, and she will be speaking to us on the Powhatan Indians of Virginia and the chronology records of the tribes from 1570 up to circa 1970.
But I'm going to start off with a sea story, a small one. All of you Indian folks know from experience that everybody in the country remembers finally that there are Indians in the United States when we get November. And that's it, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. So do anthropologists get that too. And one of the gigs I went to, initially unwilling, and then I found I was going to have some fun with it, was an interview on WHRO, the public radio station in Norfolk. And I had forgotten the fellow who did the interview. He was an old friend though, and his questions were good. We had a lovely time. But right at the beginning, he asked us two guests. The other stool pigeon being James Axtell, historian from William and Mary. When and where was the first Thanksgiving? And he asked Jim Axtell first. And maybe you'll remember Jim's answer. I just know I disagree with it. He was going to be wrong no matter what he said. He did historian. I studied archaeology too, forefield, subfield anthropology. So he turns to me then and says, well, do you have an opinion? I said, as usual, oh yes. The first Thanksgiving took place over 30,000 years ago in the Bering Strait region, which was followed by a pregnant silence. It means that all of the Native Americans who came over here were already doing Thanksgivings. Maybe not with the same foods, but anything that went right, they gave thanks for it, remember? Come on, guys. Yeah, and most people are, well, I wanted to be off the wall and I succeeded, let's put it that way. In the 1980s and 90s at Old Dominion University, I was finally allowed to teach a semester course on Virginia Indians. Once I got a couple of books at least sent to a publisher, they began to believe I could teach one. Wasn't that sweet? With all the years, I'd had 20 years in New York by that time. So I taught it, and I was allowed to teach it, you'll love this, once every 4 years.
All right.
In the sociology department. But at the same time that I taught it, there was a tacit agreement that Jim Sweeney in the history department would be teaching Virginia history. And there were always a few lazy bums around, curious, but essentially lazy, who said, oh, 2 courses on old Virginia. I bet they overlap. I won't have to do so much reading. About halfway through the semester, at least one of them would come up to me and say, there's no overlap. You're teaching a different world. I'm hearing about 2 different worlds, one's out of science fiction. I said, no, you're hearing about Indians. Their point of view was a trifle different. And that encouraged him at least to finish the semester, which was awfully good. So as all of you know, and it's come out very, very clearly in the sessions today, that there's a lot of misconception held by people, and there are a lot of questions also from the people who are honest enough to know what they don't know. And they will be poking questions. And I suspect that Indian people get a whole bunch of questions too, right? You're Indian, you're a fossil, there's you should know exactly how things were done 400 years ago. And you get treated that way?
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you about a couple of things I want to give to the tribal offices that will show you and give you quicker access to the ammunition that I collected to write those first 2 books. Those were to establish not only that there was a great deal to find out about the traditional Indian way of life in Eastern Virginia, but also there was a very complex history and went right on down to the present. And once I'd established that, I could go and play in other pools of more complicated water, but still in Eastern Virginia, until of course I began invading the neighbors, the last 2 books, Maryland and North Carolina. For the traditional culture book, the only way I could be sure I wouldn't miss things and that I was going to get things straight as I wrote it. And see, I do my technical stuff first. The actual writing of a book, the Englishing, I do much later. I set everything up with a very detailed outline that's already footnoted, and the footnotes in, and the bibliography compiled as I go, so I don't miss things. And I certainly don't have to hand it off to some poor slob of a student who has hard enough money. I never did that. Well, I told you I wasn't going to do that. So I do the technical part stuff first. And to do that, I had to do even something else first. And that was to go through all of the eyewitness sources. In the case of the traditional culture, they were all going to be before about 1622. And I made what we in the anthropology racket call a culture trait index. It's also point by point by point, ways of life, specific customs, beliefs, what they use, what they make it out of, et cetera, et cetera. For instance, there's one category, I've got about 150 categories in this thing. It's a lot of files. If I printed it out, it would be very thick. And I said, okay, let's try wrist guards. What do we know about wrist guards? Eventually, I extended my work to Maryland and North Carolina in order to invade those territories. Also to get friends of mine in those territories published, because they had done research that I hadn't, and they had no chance to write, so I was their scribe. But for all the traditional culture chapters, I did those. Wrist guards, okay. No mention whatever in North Carolina, 0. No mention in Maryland, 0. But the records are more limited there. I actually found, I think, 3 mentions in passing of wrist guards in Virginia. And one, interesting enough, said that the wrist guard he had seen was made out of wolf skin. And you get some interesting little byways this way. Anyway, I pulled all that together. You can be mad at me, but I pulled it together. First handwritten, then typed, and then while I was evacuated to get away from Hurricane Isabel, I live on low ground down by the bay, I was digitizing the thing. It's currently in Microsoft Word. I still want to put it in plain text before I inflict it on anybody. And then it ought to be good and readable for, another 10 years maybe, with technology changing so fast. I'd like to give this to the tribal offices so that you could look up something real fast. You don't have to shoot from the hip, unless you want to, of course, that's your choice. But you can find out real fast what eyewitness people actually wrote. And it doesn't always go along with oral tradition, and I'm sorry, but that's real life. So that's one thing. That would be on flash drives. Second thing that I would like to give to the tribal offices, also on flash drives, hopefully in plain text, is the chronological index that I had to make in order to write Pocahontas's people. I put every single incident in that thing that I could possibly find, anything that was relevant to the Powhatans. It also is a fairly long thing. It's about 4 long files rather than 20 or so. But it kept me grounded as to what things happened in what sequence. Now, I didn't write it in sequences. I had to do topics and then what records I had for the topic. Otherwise, it would not have been readable. The original draft was going to be completely unintelligible. But I used that chronological index, and it helped me immensely because I not only had the quotes, I had the references, the page numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and I could plug it right smack into the bibliography as I looked on Pocahontas's people. If you want to know what something happened on a cerebral day, or you hear somebody mention, oh, well, sometime around 16 something or other this happened, you can check it out pretty fast. You can do it in a few seconds. It also, that particularly, is useful when you are dealing with some of the people that are out in the public. They are not always scrupulous. They do what I call hijacking other people's history. And that's happened to a lot of Indians. I'm sure you all know that. Yeah. And you can catch them real fast with eyewitness accounts. And also, even these days, you can get a photograph of the document and throw it in their faces. Mr. Winston, are you realize somebody's hijacking a piece of monkey history for their own benefit right now?
I have heard of such.
I'm in touch with the local historical society that's outraged. Yeah, and that's the first thing they did when they wrote to me. I looked up the event 1623, and sure enough, it was Pamunky's history, it wasn't theirs. So you can put a stop to some of these scams pretty fast. Very useful thing, just pure reference. But I'd like to see the tribal officers get that. Otherwise, you poor souls, you poor chiefs are going to have to keep writing to me. And frankly, darlings, I'm not always going to be around. I don't have any immediate plans to depart, but I'm starting to interstate going home. So yes, I want y'all to have these. You may or may not use them. If you never use them, that's lovely. It means nobody's bugging you. So I want y'all to have these. There is something else that I have put together, which is in hard copy and harder to deal with. And at present, it's in the state library, the copy. I have the original. You better believe I have the original. And the state library went and dumped it, the Rountree collection of Virginia Indian documents. It is all Xerox pages. It is all of the colonial records that were published. I did not put in Xeroxes of court books and so on from the courthouses because those are big books. For one thing, I can't really lift them anymore. I found it out the hard way last year. But it is published. You can go to the page immediately and you can see it, and it's a Xerox thing. Executive Journals of the Council of Colonial Virginia, if you want to know exactly who was transported when the Anzaticos got shuffled off unwillingly to Antigua, the document's in there. In Xerox form, it's the original. So you can get that. I've also got all the treaties. You can lay hands on them. They're in one Xerox packet, and you can shove it in the Xerox. It's Xeroxable, that's the point. So I've got the treaties. I tracked down all the things that were written about the Strachey Dictionary. And you have to get to a published book to see the Strachey Dictionary as it was copied and all that. But if you want to know what Frank Siebert made of it, and he actually spoke Penobscot, which is related, not that closely, but related. I've got Siebert in there. I've been Xeroxing that visibly for a project that's going on among some of the tribes right now. That's in there. I also included anything I could find about any other Indian folks in Virginia, the Iroquois speakers and the Siouan speakers too. That's in there. But let me see. I had to go all over the face of the earth, it felt like, to get everything Dr. Frank Stack had ever written about Virginia. Because he published in incredibly obscure places. And sometimes I had to track down a former student of his and say, do you still have a Xerox? Can you make a copy for me? I've got all that. Nobody has to do it anymore. It's in the collection. Xerox. It's right there. And everything I could find by James Moody and other anthropologists, other sociologists, other historians, not more recent history, William Mary Cornell, that sort of thing. Sorry, I didn't do that. There's too much of it. I have also done in one place in the collection all of my shorter publications. You can get most of my books by Amazon, but it's a bit harder and more laborious to get. I haven't even counted them lately. There's one that's still got to come out. It's being published in Britain, so they're being held up. Probably 15 or so chapters and journal articles. All those are right there. And in the last, number 7 volume, 7 4-inch volumes, this stuff is all in. I wrote a lot of other things that I didn't publish for various reasons. My unpublished stuff is in there. Don't copy it, don't let your students copy it, but it is free to send out to anybody you want. It's fine. And nearly all of it's about Virginia. There, I think, are only there's 2 exceptions. And one of them, I don't know whether you know this or not, but in Pocahontas' People, I know it looks as if it's all nice and put together. And in fact, we had a screaming fight, the publisher and I, about the very first chapter, the introduction. My original introduction was going to be the theme of Pocahontas' people, which is when people have an ethnic identity and they pass it on to their descendants, it's going to get changed because their ways of life change. It may change with the people's language. It may change with the people's appearance even. They remain still an identifiable ethnic group. And I did a lot of anthropology and sociology research in order to do that and show it and explain it clearly to people who are not familiar with the concept. And University of Oklahoma Press says, this is sociology. It's bad enough you're doing two disciplines, anthropology and history. We can't let you do a third. And they had me over a barrel. I was not published yet. In order to get it published, I had to give in. But the original introduction is in the collection. And they made me write again, yet again, a quickie on Powhatan culture as of 1607. I was so thrilled. But that ethnicity thing is in there. Now, I don't know whether I would ever be able to get all that stuff scanned. I have given a copy to a couple of friends, all 7 volumes, and it's very big, but hardly any. But before I gave it to tribal people, I think I would do better to scan it so it's electronic and you can access it on a computer, deal with it faster and then print it out. I don't know when or how I'm going to do that. But you can still go to the state library and get all that and throw it in the Xerox machine as is. It's all loose leaf and stuff. All right? This is ammunition. We're dealing with legal boots.
Yes, we are.
Although there are very many in this book.
We might could find a grant to take care of digitizing.
Yeah, about it.
So we may
I
want to
even thought of
collaborate.
that. I don't think in terms of grants. I never got them.
Well,
I'm not a grant getter. I don't go to writing up pies.
I think in terms of that, but I think we can write a grant to take care of it.
In that case, we could give it to the tribal offices. That'd be great. I've got it right in my house and bring it to whoever wants to do it. Yeah, it's fine. All right, one last thing, and this will not be comedy necessarily. It's actually thinking ahead, which I've got to do, of course. I have got a lot of papers generated over the years. I've got a fair amount of field notes. What I have in spades is correspondence. Now that's another thing that Dr. Frank Speck taught me what not to do with correspondence. He threw most of his stuff away. And I have missed all sorts of things that he may possibly have known and written to people in the 30s about Virginia Indian people, because he didn't keep his stuff. I also grew up in a small business family. My dad was a retail furniture merchant. And he said, you not only save the correspondence that comes in, you make a carbon of anything you write. So you have it. You may need to take somebody to court. I have been saving both letters received and letters sent since 1969. And they amount to probably something close to 10,000 pages by now. Because I get a lot of correspondence, a lot of questions, and when people want a full answer, I give it to them. All that stuff is going to the Smithsonian Institution, specifically the National Anthropological Archives. My first 15 years of papers are already up there. You can find out what I wrote about your granddaddy. If I met him. But they're already up there, and by my will, they're going to get packed up from my house once I have flown the coop. And they're going to get taken to Washington. And to show that it's more respectable, far more respectable now. And in fact, 2003, I didn't expect the Smithsonian to accept my papers, but I was willing to send them. It was so obvious at some of the conventions I've been going to for many years that working with Eastern Algonquian speakers was not quite respectable. If you really wanted to be able to get grants and get people, plenty of people coming to study under you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if you go to Eastern Indians, you did Seminole, Cherokee, or Iroquois. If you did anybody else, forget it. No grants, no nothing. And I was pretty sure that the Smithsonian didn't have anybody who was clued in well enough. I proved to be wrong. who would even go to vouch for me that I was doing legitimate anthropological work. However, I found that Bill Sturtevant up there was managing the anthropology department. And I was going to conventions overseas with him and a few others. We had a small American mafia that went to Christian Faith's American Indian workshop. That's what he called us, the American Mafia. I think they were hoping that Faith and I, who did the Virginia Tribal Education chapter in the Handbook of North American Indians, they figured that he and I would fight. Tough luck, we made friends back in '71. Anyway, Bill Sturtevant gave them a very strong answer, and within half an hour they called me back and said, when can you bring it? So it's up there. And the rest will go up there. And it is open to the public, it is open for scholars and also for amateurs. They do have certain precautions up there and all that, but it is a public library. And you can read my stuff up there. I'm not going to try to digitize it or anything else. I won't live that long, and neither will any of you. And that's all I've got to say. Any questions?
Helen, speaking of folks appropriating other tribes' identity, there's a group, the Kiskiak Chickahominy. They have a website, and on their front page, it's a collage of the Chickahominy chiefs, and I'm one of them. This was taken without permission, and these photos are copyrighted, and then there's one.
Kiskiak Chickahominies. Boy, is that an invention.
Another spurious group that decided they wanted to. And then another picture they had is Chief Terrell Bradley.
Terrell Bradley, yes, it's something.
And then looking under it, they said, these images cannot be reprinted without permission, as though they were their images.
But they published it anyway. These are lovely people. I better go check them out.
Yeah. Go online and check them out.
Yeah, I will. It's a real adventure. I checked out North Carolina before I submitted the final form. The history of that chapter, by the way, in North Carolina was written by me, but researched by West Dr. Ray, who knew much, much better what he was doing down there. It's 40 years of work with him. And just see who was on the horizon. That was fascinating. Really fascinating. Anybody else? Cheers.
So everything that she stood here and she relayed to you, she already has it all ready to go. She wants to ensure that it's in your hands, that you have that history and that you own it. The pieces that she doesn't have that needs to be Xeroxed, we VTEC are going to help her do that so that we can get it in your hands. But this is her gift to y'all, and we want to make sure you know that she's passing all of her legacy directly to you. Some is going to the Smithsonian, the majority of it's going directly to you. And I cannot thank you enough for that.
We are on a high note. Thank you. First, like to say, we've heard a lot today about accuracy and history. Well, today I think we have made accurate history. I got that from a very wise man. As today is our first VTEC conference. It's been very informative and inspiring. Truly want to thank all of our honorable guests and our speakers, presenters, our staff, the current and new, everyone who took time today to participate and just be a part of this opportunity that we have today. It's very humbling and inspiring to have everybody here with us, to have just a part in the fight as we move forward with this long battle. I want to also send out a special thank you to May, Dr. May Edwards. She is like the driving force or the little train that could behind all of this. She's been very inspirational in everything that we've done in VTEC and me on a personal level, so thank you. Also want to call out another very special individual. And unfortunately, she has stepped out. Very awkward. Where'd she go? Okay, anyway, we are going to come back to her. But while we do that, I know we're looking to wrap up. So I have a call to action for each and every one of you. Real quickly, I would like for you to take 90 seconds to think about all of the stuff that you've heard today, and maybe you've made some notes in the program or in one of the booklets that's on the table of something you want to do or something you want to follow up on, or maybe even a conversation that you want to have prior to this. I want you to highlight a specific action or a task that you are going to get done within the next 7 days that relates to VTEC. And I say that, VTEC especially, because I know our Thanksgiving is coming up and this is not a time to make your Thanksgiving list. But anyway, I'm going to give you like 90 seconds. Please write down something that you will do within the next 7 days that is going to make progress, or that is something that's going to be on the behalf of VTEC. And then share that with the person that's sitting to the right of you. I want you to do that, as this will help with some accountability.